What makes something ban-worthy? Well, there's certainly not one all-encompassing answer. Even the most experienced players often disagree on the specifics. However, we can give an overview of the general idea behind what would make something worthy of the ban hammer. To answer this question, we must ask and answer another one. Why do we have bans in competitive Pokemon to begin with? If bans aren't your thing to begin with, the anything goes tier might be the one for you. However, the fundamental idea behind the concept of bans is to remove elements of the game that are so powerful they remove skill from the equation. It's something most of us understand instinctively. Of course, you're not supposed to use Mewtwo. It's so much stronger than everything else that it throws the game out of balance. Of course, not everything needs to be on the level of Mewtwo to be ban-worthy, but more of that later. The basic principle is that you want to foster a metagame where players are defeating each other with team building and in-battle skill, not because they use a strategy that was basically unstoppable. You want the game to be in the player's hands. This makes sense, right? You wouldn't want to play a game where you lose because the other player has something you can't reasonably answer. That defeats the whole purpose of playing. It's why OHKO moves are banned. You can't click them without regard for what your opponents will do, and your opponent is almost entirely helpless to do anything but pray that the move misses. This kind of dice rolling to score KOs is contrary to the type of desired skill you want in a game. In Gen 5 Ubers, OHKO moves were briefly tested, and the entire game quickly devolved into Kyogre fishing for free sheer code KOs, if it worked. And with multiple opportunities to land a 30% chance, it worked far too often. It was unfairly difficult to deal with. Before we keep going, I do want to say that I personally do not agree with every single ban that happened. And I want to ask you, do you agree? Why or why not? And feel free to list actual examples of ones you don't agree with. So how do we find our metric for what is reasonable to deal with and what isn't? Again, this is highly contentious, but we'll lay out a basic foundation. It's not just Pokemon that outrun in OHKO everything, or Pokemon that have no counters. If that were the case, we'd have almost no Ubers. It's more about what is reasonable to be able to handle in the team builder and in common battle conditions. Pokemon is not a game played in a vacuum, and this must be considered. Kyogre has counters after all. In Generation 4, it can be countered by an OU team with a Abomasnow, or a UU team with Rain Dish Ludicolo, or an NU team with Quagsire. Does this make Kyogre not broken? No, not at all, because it's completely unreasonable to have to run those Pokemon or get completely ruined. That's not the only way to look at it either. In Generation 5 OU, Rotom Heat countered both Genesect and Tornadus Therian, in a vacuum anyway. In practice, with its weakness to Stealth Rock and both Pokemon's tendency for spamming U-turn, Rotom Heat was actually terrible at answering them. This is what is meant by common battle conditions. Furthermore, Rotom Heat was a terrible Pokemon in Gen 5 OU. A Pokemon might have counters, but if it's forcing overly obscure or otherwise terrible Pokemon to be used just to try and stave it off, it is a sign that that threatening Pokemon is having an unhealthy effect on the metagame. This last point is particularly important because it is common to see a broken Pokemon's weakness pointing out. For example, how could Landorus Incarnate be broken if it's KO'd by common water and ice moves? Well, first of all, every Pokemon has a weakness, even Kyogre, even every form of Arceus, even Mega Rayquaza. Having weaknesses does not prelude a Pokemon from being broken. It's more about the effect it has on the metagame, and in the case of Landorus Incarnate, which was difficult to stop reliably, its effect has been profoundly restrictive, overbearing, and negative. We can also see these philosophies in Evasion Clause, which prohibits tactics like Double Team and Sandveil. Yes, technically you can use never miss moves like Aerial Ace to hit a Pokemon with its evasion boosted, but seeing as Aerial Ace is generally a weak, terrible move, you will not be using it otherwise. And just because you won't miss against a Sandveil Pokemon doesn't mean you're actually checking it if you're hitting it with such a weak move. It is unreasonable for 100% accurate moves like Ice Beam to not hit their targets because it restricts the option for reliably dealing with evasion boosters too greatly and removes skill from the equation. All in all, if something can't be handled consistently or reliably, it should be banned. For example, nobody would dispute that Gen 7 Zygarde could be checked or countered. The problem was that Zygarde could easily turn the tables on all its counters without losing much effectiveness. Whether it was running Subtoxic, Steelium Z Dragon Dance, or Rest Coil, it was too difficult to reasonably answer it given how much it destroyed and with how effortlessly it could take advantage of its checks. Furthermore, it was an immense, unusual strain on team building with how its Thousand Arrows invalidated many would-be ground-type answers in flying types and levitators. Usually, it's offensive Pokemon that are too difficult to deal with, and that makes sense, as we more instinctively think of Mewtwo and Kyogre blasting everything apart without recourse. However, defensive Pokemon can be too much too. Nobody would struggle to withstand hits from something like Lugia or base Giratina, but they certainly would have a difficult time reasonably breaking through them. A less extreme example would be Gen 6 Mega Sableye. Sure, it was certainly far from unbeatable, but it placed far too great a strain on team building with how suffocatingly it invalidated so many crucial tactics for indirect damage. It is difficult enough to handle the metagame at large without especially restrictive threats running around. When a strategy requires overly specific methods to handle, teams are forced to pick between more lethal poisons in their decisions, and this leads to battles with the undesirable overpowered element that overwhelms a skillful play. All in all, there's no right way to determine something's ban-worthiness. If there were, there wouldn't exist the long-standing competitive Pokemon tradition of arguing over whether something is broken or not. even when it clearly is, such as in the case of X and Y Age Slash. However, all in all, the purpose of a ban should be to make for a more skillful metagame. The purpose of competitive Pokemon is to reward skill after all. If you're wondering why certain aspects of Pokemon haven't been banned despite falling under this category, well, nobody said the tiering system was perfect. We have Scald running around in 4 generations after all. However, if you're wondering why something was banned in the past, it's because it was unreasonably difficult to deal with and was impeding the expression of skill that we strive to maximize in competitive Pokemon. I just want to say again that I don't agree with every single ban that's happened, even if I do play Smogon tiers. And I don't like every single ban, and that's okay, and you don't have to either. But if you guys did like this video, make sure you let me know by leaving a like and subscribe for more, as I upload these discussion videos 3 to 4 times a month. Check out my previous one on Mega Rayquaza and the one before that on why Blaziken was finally unbanned after 10 years.